A note to our listeners before we start the show. This episode may contain triggering and sensitive topics, including abuse. Please take care while listening or switch to a different episode that is more suitable for you.
Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Voice of Adoptees, which brings together diverse and unique voices from around the world to share their stories. If you like today's episode, remember to give us a like, subscribe, and leave a review. Here's your host, David Shunk.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Voice of Adoptees. I'm your host, David. Today, I'm here with Dinora, who is a Honduras adoptee. She is a mother of two. She's married to her husband of 13 years, and we're so excited to have her on the show. Welcome, Dinora. Please tell our listeners a little about yourself, where you live, where you were adopted from, even though I just said Honduras, and a fun fact about it.
Well, I was born in La Ceiba, Honduras, right off the Caribbean coast. It's one of the most beautiful places. And I was adopted into Minnesota and been living here in the Twin Cities pretty much my whole life. And I guess an interesting fact is that I grew up knowing very well that I'm adopted. I was a brown girl living in a city where it was all cornfields and there was no one that looked like me there. And I got the honor of finding my birth mother after 10 years of searching, and the whole thing aired on TV in Honduras.
Wow. Did you ask, how did Honduras, find the fact that you were doing this search, and how did that all happen?
I kind of just do Google searches all the time throughout my life, trying to find my mother, people that could help me, whether they were missionaries or people going down to the area to visit. And it was normal that pretty much they fell through. And it's really hard to find someone reliable that would actually help me and not just say they would help me. But there was a woman that I found on Facebook who had a Facebook page specifically for Honduran adoptees seeking their biological family. And I messaged her, and I honestly didn't think anything would come out of it. But 2 years later, she called me out of the blue. It was Cinco de Mayo, and she said, I want permission to air all your information on TV in Honduras right this minute. And if we get something, whether it was a family member that called or someone who knew any information, we would get in contact with you right away. And
Right.
my sister had reached out, which I had no idea I even had a sister.
What information did you have when you were adopted? Like, what did the Honduras government put down on a form? Or
I had more information than I feel like a lot of people had. I had pictures of my mom. I knew her full name. I knew why she gave me up. I had pictures of my brother. So it was a decent amount of information, and I had my birth name as well. And a letter maybe from like the second grade that my mom had wrote me to tell me why she made the choices she did and how much she wished she didn't have to make that choice, but it was what was best for me.
wow. So you didn't know you had a sister, but you knew you had a brother. How did that kind of you said that it was the news, because of the news episode that aired in Honduras. That's how you found your sister. How did your
Yes.
siblings react to when you reached out?
A lot of my family actually didn't even know I existed. Some of them did, some of them didn't. So they were all very welcoming and great and excited, especially my younger brother. He is probably more of a crybaby than I am, and he was in absolute tears.
That's awesome. Yeah, it's much more common than you think that adoptions are kind of like a hush hush thing in some countries and cultures, or yeah, it's a similar thing with my adoption. But anyway, so tell us about like your upbringing in the United States, what your adoptive family was like, and how was it being raised in the United States?
It wasn't great, I won't lie. Early on, things were good. Just like how you would want and expect things. I had an older brother that was a Romanian adoptee, and he looked very similar to me, but our parents were white. But it never really bothered me or phased me a whole lot because I had so many people around me that loved me. I remember and have pictures of being at the airport and coming in for the first time, and everybody was there with balloons and banners, not just family, but neighbors and close friends that were a really important part of my life. But once I got older, maybe around fourth and fifth grade, things drastically changed. It was always very apparent that our family stuck out like a sore thumb. Our parents adopted 4 children, all of different ethnic backgrounds, 2 with special needs, and so we got a lot of stares, and people would even be bold enough sometimes to go directly up to my adopted mother in front of me and make comments of why she would even adopt us. And it was not easy. I've had neighbors make comments, a lot of racism, a lot of, "Nobody wanted you, you're just an orphan," and it was hard, and so it was really tricky. I was in therapy from an early age, 7 years old, throughout my entire life. I was pushed to take a bunch of medications and medications for conditions I didn't even have. My adopted parents would say my birth mother drank alcohol while she was pregnant with me, so they diagnosed me or misdiagnosed me with fetal alcohol syndrome. And it caused a lot of issues throughout my childhood, so much to the point where my adopted dad was an alcoholic, and when he drank, he was very angry, and any little thing could set him off, and I would get the hard end of it. And my adopted mother would just watch, and sometimes she would contribute too, and she struggles with a lot of mental health issues, so much to the point where I really questioned a lot about adoption agencies and why they don't do deeper dives, especially for international adoptees, to not have these situations happen.
Yeah, that was gonna be you kinda answered that. I was gonna have a question. My next question literally was, what do you think that the adoption agency failed in doing a appropriate background check? But I think from, your story so far, we can
Yeah.
make that conclusion, but
Yeah.
you can
I
continue.
think
Yeah.
it should be more than just a background check and a visit to the house. There needs to be a lot more done. My adopted mother had been through a lot. She had her mother, who was also adopted and struggled with adoption just like I did, committed suicide. And she came in and she saw what happened. She had shot herself and she cleaned up her own mother's remains. And I don't want to knock people with mental health issues to like they shouldn't adopt, but I think certain people who've gone through and struggle with certain things and aren't getting the proper help shouldn't be able to adopt because you don't know what these adopted children are coming into your home with, if it's reactive attachment disorders or any kind of other issues, that you need someone that's very mentally stable to be able to nurture and care and handle in the best way they can. But instead, it turned out to be a lot of anger on their part, a lot of abuse. I would go to police officers. I worked with a social worker since I was in fifth grade. And no matter how often I spoke up about incidences or things that happened, no one believed me. No one listened to me. The only people that would maybe listen are like people I confided in that were more of friends, maybe some neighbors. but otherwise, it just went on and on and on. And when I finally left that situation, they had kicked me out of the house for the second time when I was 17 years old. And I was kind of on my own. Social services didn't do much but put me in, let like a friend foster me. And they had also kicked me out very quickly. And I was found at a hotel by police officers sitting in a corner, scared because I had nowhere else to go but to this hotel room where there was a party and people were nice enough to let me in, even though it wasn't a great situation. And I almost got brought to jail that night, but someone was so bold and stuck up for me. And the cops actually listened despite what they saw that I had a record of running away over and over again due to the constant abuse in my home. And they showed up to their front door. They opened it, and my adoptive father answered, and the cop said, "Is this your daughter?" And he was very angry. You could see it on his face. And he said to him, "And what if I said it wasn't?" And they argued for 2 hours while I waited in the back of the police car. It was snowing in May because, of course, we're in Minnesota.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they forced them to let me stay that night if they didn't want to get immediate charges of neglect and maltreatment. And then in the morning, they would pick me up and bring me to a children's shelter. And so I came in the house. They said, "You don't deserve to sleep on anything. You can stay on the floor," and threw me a blanket. And that's it. They took me off to a children's shelter, which I stayed for a week. And I was almost 18, so they really didn't do much for me after that. I was kind of on my own. I struggled with issues all throughout my adulthood with homelessness and so many other things. And unfortunately, some things that my son had to witness, including trying to kidnap my own son from me.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Did any of the I know you just said the police was threatening charges. Did any of those charges actually happen, or did they just kind of walk away?
Well, what had happened was, I believe it was social services did an investigation. They did find them guilty of neglect and maltreatment, but what they did was they didn't file criminal charges. They just found them guilty through the county. And so if you looked up their criminal record, there is no evidence of anything that they done to me. But if you were to do a deep dive within the county we lived in, that's when you would find out the information that they were charged with that. And that was going to stick with them for 10 years. So they wouldn't be able to do foster care, daycare, or probably adopt any children again. And that's it. It just felt like something that was swept under the rug and hidden. And probably because they've been a part of the foster care system for 9 years doing that, and they adopted all these kids, and it would look bad for them, especially with how many times I've spoken out and begged for my life for someone to help me, and no one did.
Now, were your other adopted siblings, did they receive similar treatment from your adoptive parents, or was it mainly targeted to you?
It was targeted towards me, and the reason why I think it was targeted towards me is because I'm the only one out of all four of my siblings that had such a connection and desire to know about my roots, my birth family, where I come from, and that wasn't easy. And then on top of that, my two younger siblings had fetal alcohol syndrome, so they knew they had to be really careful with them. I mean,
Right.
sometimes maybe with my younger brother, they might have done a thing or two, but nothing on the level as they did to me.
Okay. Wow.
And despite of them, I'm actually really lucky to be alive.
Yeah. Well, it's a good thing you you got out of there and yeah, probably didn't look back.
Yes. No, I didn't. I tried with them, but, I continued to at least try to have a relationship, very minimal, but it was more damaging than anything to even try to do that.
Wow. So, would you say that would you blame the government for failing, I guess, with their responsibilities with appropriately?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Absolutely. I feel like being someone like I am, someone that's brown and having white parents, especially in the community I lived in where there wasn't a lot of us. I could count on one hand how many of us there were.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I feel like the mentality as well, look at these nice people who went out of the way to another country to bring her out of this poverty and this poor, poor place and give her a home, a roof over her head. There's no way they could be bad people.
Yep.
And so they just automatically don't believe me. It's us as children, especially brown children raised by white people, don't have as much of as a voice, I would say.
Wow. Well, after all those traumatic events, when did you, I guess, start having an interest in finding your biological family? I know you mentioned it briefly at the beginning of, how you did it, but let's dive into that because I'm fascinated how how the story kind of works its way through of the rediscovery process and what made you want to reach out and yeah,
I've always wanted to my entire life. I would even dream of the person my mom was. And it was probably when the abuse started, when I really wanted to find her. And I tried and I tried and always came up with nothing until I found that page. And once I found out that my sister reached out and that it was really her, they got her ID and my mom's ID just to ensure it wasn't going to be like a scam. This is the real thing.
yeah,
I got on the phone and I tried to get to them as fast as I possibly could.
yeah.
And the woman who helped me find her was there for me once I arrived in Honduras to help me through the beginning.
Now, are you a dual citizen or are you just or did Honduras give up your citizenship or do you not know or
I am not a dual citizen, but I do want to take the steps to be a dual citizen. Next time I go down to Honduras, I would really like that to be part of my trip.
yeah, absolutely. You probably don't even need to go down there. If you have the paperwork already,
Oh,
you can file it with the embassy in the US.
oh,
Um,
that I did not know. I
yeah,
would
so
love to do that because my attachment to my country, and I'm gonna
yeah,
continue to go there as often as I could, is just so strong.
that's awesome. That's really cool. So how many relatives have you met so far in Honduras? How many people in your family are there?
When I first went there, pretty much everyone who is there. The
Yeah,
one person I didn't get to see that I really wish I would have was my older brother, the one that I had all the pictures of.
yeah.
When I was 16 years old, he was murdered. And that was very hard for me to find out. And it's still hard for me till this day. But it was really hard back in Honduras in 2009 and a lot of corruption, a lot of stuff going on. And he was in the middle of it.
Wow, you just can't catch a break. Wow.
No, it doesn't feel like I can sometimes. I feel like I'm very unlucky at times, but
Well, I mean,
at the same time, very lucky to be here and to have my husband and my 2
absolutely.
children.
Yeah, that's awesome. So obviously, you're attached to Honduras. That's pretty cool. You've expressed interest in learning the language, and I'm curious to know: is there anything else with the culture that you have kind of adopted into your family's kind of like lifestyle? Lifestyle. Do you celebrate certain holidays? Do you cook certain foods?
Oh, we love to cook in our house. I
Oh,
cook Kenyan food, which my husband is Kenyan. I
okay.
tried to cook Honduran food, but that's a little trickier. I'm still learning. I'll cook like Dominican dishes, Puerto Rican, Mexican, Colombian, just kind of
Mm,
anything from any Latin American country. I love to incorporate. I do speak Spanish with my sons a little bit as much as I can, so they will learn. I got my son into Spanish immersion school and just got him to be involved in the way I wish I would have been involved when I was younger.
that's great. Yeah, that's awesome. I always joked with people I know about, one day when I have kids, they're going to learn Russian better than I can ever speak it. So then they can be my translator.
Yes, I have the same train of thought
Yep.
because
And,
learning as an adult is the toughest thing.
yeah, that's really cool that, I mean, combining those different cultures and everything and having your kids get to experience a little bit of where you're from and where your
Mhm.
husband's from. I think that's really special
It
because it's a
is.
rich culture and being from Central America and then your husband being from Kenya. I mean, that's awesome. I think that's really cool. So I'm curious to know your opinion on, I guess, adoption like right now. If someone were to ask you, on the street, hey, would you adopt a child abroad? I'm curious. What would you?
Absolutely, I would.
Yeah.
Despite my own adoption, for people that I know, and then myself too, who've been through fertility issues, I think adoption can be a good thing. But it's a business where it's a lot about money and should be focused more on the well being of children and what homes they are going into. And I think it's a good thing. I don't think adoption should be abolished, but I think it should become a lot stricter.
Yeah.
But yet again, a lot easier for some families to adopt because I know people who want to have kids but can't because they can't prove that they can meet the financial expectations that they.
Right. Yeah. As an adoptee, I've heard a lot of other adoptees say that when it comes to if they want kids or not, they would either love to adopt, to share that experience, to bond with the child, or they would love to have their own child because they want to see, their own DNA and like their own personality in a child. I mean, you're lucky that you had photos. I remember you mentioning that. A lot of people adopt international. We don't get that. Like from Russia,
Yes.
we got a lot of false information. So we
Mm,
never knew until you found your family what your mother looked like, what the father looked
yeah.
like, where you get your smile in your eyes, and like
Mm,
all that information. So I think that's so important. And I agree with you. Record keeping needs to be a lot better, and the welfare of the children need to be more important than financial responsibility. Yeah.
yeah. Yes, I'm very thankful for the picture of my mom, and she looks exactly like me. So the moment I saw her, I didn't need anybody to do a DNA test or tell me if that was my mother. I could tell probably from every one of my family members that they were related to me, that it's so scary how much we look alike.
Yeah. Now, have your family down in Honduras, have they met your children and your husband yet? Or did you go back alone the first time or?
The first time I went back with my son when he was 5 years old, and so they got to meet him right away, and he got to be a part of that experience, and I went down a second time a couple years ago after all the stuff with COVID was
Yep.
pretty much died down, and I had brought my husband there, and that's actually where he proposed to me. Once he met my mom, my dad, and my pretty much my whole family, he proposed to me right at the end of our trip.
Man, he nailed it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, he did. It was perfect timing, but I waited 10 years for that, so I was very anxious for that ring.
Yeah. Now my brother got married a year ago, and he and his wife now, they were pretty much together for I think going on 11 years. And I think it was my dad that finally said, "Son, it's time."
Yeah.
So I'm curious to know about when you said that, you started therapy at a young age, and I've been in and out therapy as well as a lot of adoptees are. Would you say that being adopted has certain, I guess, stigmas that are attached to you as a child that, we bring from where we're adopted? A lot of therapists think that, oh, well, if you're adopted, you probably have, identity issues or you have
Mhm.
underlying conditions. I'm just curious to know what your experience has been with your therapist over the years.
As a child, it was hard because it was supposed to be just individual therapy for myself to work through some of my adoption issues and grew into be so much more than that.
Yeah.
And whatever my adopted mother would tell her, she would believe. So everything that I said sometimes felt like it didn't matter because she would contradict it with what you would go back and tell the therapist. And so it didn't feel very successful for me. It felt more damaging. But as an adult, and finding a right therapist that can understand me and that will listen to me is very helpful. I think you just need the right person, and it would have been easier to have that strictly individual therapy without my adoptive parents in her ear.
Yeah. Would you right now, I know the relationship with your adoptive parents is complicated. Are they in touch with you at all, or are they completely, I guess, removed from your life at the moment?
They are actually completely removed from my life. I had got into a little tiff with my adoptive sister over some wedding stuff, and she involved my adopted mother, and it turned very nasty very quick. She would say things basically how I wasn't her daughter and she was going to stick up for the one that was her daughter. They even went as far as to block my son, which was very, very difficult. And he found out on Christmas and it broke his heart because my youngest brother, who has fetal alcohol syndrome, and it's pretty severe. He was born in 96 and he probably has the brain of like a 7 or 8 year old. And they still have care over him. And so with that happening, they took a person that was really important to us and really important to my son as well. And so it was not easy, but I think it was for the best because we don't need people like that in our lives.
Makes sense. Wow. So, would you say that you have a stronger relationship moving forward with your biological family in Honduras rather than your adoptive family?
Yes and no. My adoptive mother, she is the exact person I did dream of. She's so loving and sweet and caring. But from the moment I met her, I've had to learn some other things that weren't so easy. She lies a lot. She talks bad about me, especially more of because I won't send her money. And she's just kind of one of those people send me money. Oh, this is my wealthy American daughter. And that's not the case. So I speak to her. I love her no matter what because that's my mother. But I feel like I have close relationship with a couple of my biological family members, like my younger brother, and I have an aunt and uncle who immigrated over here and now in Texas that I try to visit once a year, and I'm very close with them. But I would say I guess I'm somewhat closer to them, but the real people I'm closest to that I kind of call my family is one of my best friends from middle school, and her family took me in to their home and even fought and tried to adopt me, but it unfortunately they would not allow that. And my adoptive parents, despite of everything that was going through being in and out of foster care, all the police calls to the house due to the abuse and running away, they still for some reason would not let me go. And I remained really close with them and even lived with them for a part of my adulthood. They are the ones that were there for my graduation, and they've been a big part of my life.
Wow. Yeah. Well, it's good that you had that. support, friends can go a long way.
It's minimal support, but it was something. It was a little bit of something. It was better than completely nothing.
Have your kids asked about, I guess, like what adoption is, and have you explained to them kind of like your background?
I like to be very open with some limitations with especially my oldest son, because he has been involved in some of the stuff and has full on experienced witnessing physical fights between me and my adopted mom, unfortunately. And so I've had no choice but to kind of explain some things and some harder things as well. But other than that, he doesn't really ask too many questions because I feel like he knows a lot. And then meeting my birth family with me for the first time, I think he pretty much has like no questions for me, at least at this time. But who knows, maybe as my youngest one, who is 4 right now, he may, as he gets older, because he's lived in a very different time than my oldest son.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. My final question for you is, if you could leave a piece of advice to our listeners or anyone about what you've learned about your adoption story, what would that be?
Oh, that's a hard one. I think it's to just be very sensitive, very patient, very aware of the traumas someone who is adopting to go is going through, especially when you're doing adoption that's interracial. Be very mindful of your child's culture, involve your child's culture, and show them that you love it too and it is important. And then you love them no matter what. Show that unconditional love, even in the hardest of times.
That's great advice. Wow. That's quite a story. Thank you so much for coming on and opening up and sharing all that. I'm sure people are going to appreciate hearing it from you. And I know it can be hard to talk about, but thank you again for coming forward and spending time today and talking about it. Yeah, that's at the
Of
end of the day,
course.
that's what we're doing. We got to talk about adoption for things to change. So
Yes, this is something I've actually wanted to do where my voice could be heard. So finding this and learning that it exists, I had to just jump for it because I've been waiting for someone to really hear my voice and what I have to say.
well, I'm so happy about that, and a lot of people are going to hear it, and that it's awesome. So thank you so much again for your time today, and again, bottom of my heart, we appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening. For those who want to hear Dinora's story, please visit your podcast platform or our website, voiceofadoptees.com. If you or someone you know is adopted, you can schedule an interview to be featured on our show. Don't forget to like, subscribe, rate, and share this episode to spread the voice of adoptees. We thank you for listening, and we will see you next week. Voice of Adoptees. Who am I?
Thanks for listening to Voice of Adoptees. Please take a moment to like, subscribe, and leave a review. See you next time.